Hi friends, my name's Trish Roberts and you're watching Faint Signals from Vega. I wanted to talk about animal advocacy movement in relation to some of the what appears to be Islamophobia, and it's expressed through this is just some people, a few people. I'm not smearing a whole group based on some attitudes of a small few, but I had to the other day. I had to remove somebody from my social media page. He was He was in the animal advocacy movement, a vegan, and that doesn't make me happy. But I posted something. It was from a Sam Harris podcast, and Sam Harris, as many of you may know, is very prominent in the New Atheist movement, and he said in a podcast recently, he echoed an anti-refugee talking point and proposed figuring out, quote, some way to keep the number of Muslims down in any society, whether we're honest about this or whether we do this covertly. Clearly, it's rational to want to do this. So that's something that he said in a recent podcast, and even though it was done in a hypothetical, can you imagine somebody saying that about Jews or about black people? If somebody said this in a podcast, we have to figure out some way of keeping the number of Jews down in any society, whether we're honest about it or whether we do this covertly. Clearly it's rational to want to reduce the number of Jews in society. Now, can you imagine, say, somebody saying that about Jews or about black people, that people would be okay with this? So why, and something else that he said in his book, in Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith, he said that he called for a preemptive nuclear strike, first strike, against the Muslim world as a, quote, excuse me, security measure, end quote. Excuse me. So now I want to sort of make something clear here, is that when I regularly speak up for Muslims, not because of their particular religion. I'm not sticking up for people because of their religion. I'm sticking up for a group, which happens to be Muslim, who is targeted on a daily basis, and where Western countries are bombing Muslim-majority countries, 3 bombs every hour of every day for the last 8 years anyway in the Obama administration, and it continues on today. And these bombs are also they're depleted uranium bombs, which means that, you know, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children are born with tremendous deformities. I mean, they're life-threatening deformities, where many of them don't live, and others that do live require a huge amount of care that probably can't be provided because the Western governments have bombed their countries so much that all the infrastructure is damaged and they don't have the resources. So they don't actually they're not even the mothers who have these babies who are grossly deformed, can't even look after those babies properly. And this is what we are responsible for, because we're citizens of these Western countries. I'm speaking to Westerners here. We're citizens of these Western countries, and if we're not speaking out against war, then this is very problematic. If we're not speaking out against imperialism and what our governments are doing, this is very problematic. And that's why I started a particular Facebook page, which is also, I do live streams on Friday nights. Mostly they're on Friday nights at 9:15 Eastern Daylight Savings Time on the Real Progressives page, and I'll put a link to that if you want to join in on those live streams. I do live streams there about the issue of imperialism and anti-war because it's something there is no real anti-war movement to speak of today. And that's a real problem, that there is no anti-war movement to speak of today in countries, and there's really hardly anybody in the animal advocacy movement speaking about this very, very important issue of anti-imperialism and anti-war. I mean, over 1 million people in Iraq have been killed in bombings, and they've just been everyday people just like you and I, trying to live a peaceful life. They happen to be Muslim, most of them, and we're just bombing them. And in Syria, we're doing the same thing. We're creating, we're creating, I won't go into the whole thing about Syria. I'm going to talk about that on the Facebook page via the live streams, via the Naked Empire, which is the page I'm talking about, which will have the live streams from Real Progressive. I'm going to talk about that with some people that are on the ground in Syria about that, and you'll get to understand it, if you don't already, what's really happening in Syria, and that a lot of the problems that are caused in Syria are by Western governments and our meddling in that country. That's why it's important to pay attention to journalists. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here because I wanted to talk specifically about animal advocates, the vegan animal advocates, and this issue of Islamophobia. Because because this particular person became quite affronted when I posted something about what Sam Harris had recently said, which I've read out to you. And there's other things that he said too that are equally problematic. And I sort of said, imagine saying that about black people or about Jewish people. You know, could you imagine people getting away with that? And the reason he's getting away with that is because there is an underlying Islamophobia in society, because we've been led along to believe that Muslims are evil or whatever they are, or they're violent or whatever. It's complete vilification of a group so that we can go into their countries, raise their cities to the ground, bring in corporations and take over and put pipelines through there and steal their oil and all that kind of thing. Western countries are doing this to Muslim majority countries for their resources and hegemony. So that's what we need to know first. And the mainstream media, which is corporate owned, has been manufacturing consent from the public through their completely biased and government mouthpiece news and articles to help the government get to do this in these countries. And because, you know, they're run by corporations, these large news sources. You know, 6 corporations run all the news, most of the news that's in the United States. And in Australia, Rupert Murdoch runs 75% of the news sources in Australia. So what you're going to get is propaganda which will bolster and manufacture consent, as Noam Chomsky says, manufacture consent so that the Western governments, and we benefit from it, go into these countries, Muslim majority countries, one after the other, bombing them to the ground and saying they're going in there for humanitarian reasons, in quotes. You'll always hear that, humanitarian reasons, and it's complete, utter garbage. We're going into these countries and bombing them. It's been happening since 9/11. That whole thing was used. It's been proven that was a complete falsification, the weapons of mass destruction and Saddam Hussein. It was a complete falsification so that we could go in and take the oil in that country. And from then on, I'm not saying it hasn't been happening before this, but this was an escalation in that imperialist endeavor. Ever since then, it's been just an escalation in just excuses to go into these various Muslim majority countries so that we can gain hegemony in these countries and steal their resources. And eventually we're going to get to Iran. In Syria, we're there now, and we've almost been on the verge of World War III with Russia due to our meddling there. And the ultimate aim is Iran, to take that over. And they've been vilifying Iran for I don't know how long, which has been also a nonsense. I mean, I'm not going to go into that in depth, but I will in these live streams on Real Progressives, which will be posted on The Naked Empire. And you can find that page at Empire Laid Bare, Laidbare. So if you can join that page, and you'll find out more from independent journalists, people who actually know what's going on and aren't sprouting the official mainstream narrative about the imperialist narrative. Okay, so that's why it's important that we find out what is actually happening, so that we are not dragged into this violence. And that's why we need to start anti-war movements. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up is because, the silence particularly in the communities that I know of, animal advocacy communities and vegans, and even those who claim to be against all forms of discrimination, including racism. It's either at best a complete silence about any the wars that we are waging in these countries. Complete silence. That's the best response, mostly, from 99% of the animal advocacy community or the vegan community that I know of. I'm not saying animal advocacy and veganism are the same, because lots of people promote happy animal slavery. That's not the people I'm particularly talking about, but they're also responsible. So if at best, the best we can do is be quiet about it and claim that we don't know anything, we're ignorant about it, or that it's just politics and I'm not interested in politics. That's saying, one day politics, if you're not interested in politics, one day politics will be interested in you. If we think that what's happening in these countries isn't coming back to visit us at some point, then we're grossly mistaken. So even in a selfish sense, we should be interested in this. But really, we should be interested in this because non-human animals and human animals are equally morally important. And if we say we're against racism, if we truly believe that, then we should be doing we should be saying something about it. So when somebody like Sam Harris proposes these things like preemptive nuclear strikes in Muslim-majority countries, which would mean millions of people are killed, or wiped out, or that he also is quite happy with the warmongering and imperialism that goes on in these countries. If we're okay with that, then there's something really wrong. There's something really wrong with our advocacy. Because if we claim we're not okay with racism, and people will say, "Oh, well, Islam is a religion. You can't be racist if you're okay. You can't be racist. There's no such thing as Islamophobia." I'm sorry, but this is not about the religion. People are ignoring this because this group has been vilified so much that it's about the people, not about their religion. Most people don't even know anything about Islam. And anything that you see that is in the media about it is a distortion. It's some sort of Salafist jihadi thing, which is a Wahhabist from which originated in Saudi Arabia and is a distortion of Islam, and most Muslims don't subscribe to that. And that was actually encouraged by Western governments when we started meddling in Muslim-majority countries. This was encouraged, Saudi Arabia and the United States. And as I say, you can find out more about this from these live streams that I'm going to be doing in the future on Real Progressives, and I'll put a link to that. So I'm not going to get into the whole thing here because it's a little bit complicated, but if you watch these various live streams I'm going to do, which are anti-imperialist and anti-war, you'll see, you have to know the history about this to understand how these situations have developed. People seem to think that if they're fed a whole lot of garbage about the Middle East, and I think a lot of people think that it's just violence and the people there are just violent people and that's why they're always fighting and stuff. No, it's Western meddling that has created a lot of the chaos that's happening there. So, we need to understand that. And we need to take responsibility for it because we're the ones that vote these warmongering neoliberalist imperialists into power. We're the ones that vote these people into power, and this is what they do in your name, in my name. So if we're okay with them killing hundreds and thousands of people and maiming them, like for example, in Mosul recently in Iraq, the US knew that there was a whole bunch of people who were herded basically into some alleyways in Mosul in Iraq. They knew that, and they bombed them anyway, and they killed thousands of people in Mosul in Iraq. The US empire knew that, and they did it anyway. They have no problem killing civilians, no problem whatsoever. And they're using this ISIS, which Obama said the meddling that the US did in Iraq actually created a vacuum for ISIS to arise. And ISIS is a great excuse for Western governments, for US empire to continue on going from whatever country they want to meddle in to use ISIS as an excuse. So, this is why history, understanding history and seeking out independent media is so important. If we're not seeking out independent media, then we're being fed a lot of propaganda. If we don't understand the situation in the Middle East, then we're going to be complicit. We shouldn't be, but people are being complicit in this tremendous violence there. And it kind of appalls me that even, that people like Sam Harris are just another expression of the imperialist aims of Western governments. He's quite happy to be calling for a covert reduction in Muslims. What does that mean? That's a very dangerous thing to say. And, and we shouldn't be okay with that. That's hate speech. And, this is about a people. This isn't about a religion. This is about a people. Because if it was about a religion, he would be calling out as much about the violence that is in the Bible, the violence that is in the Torah. There's tremendous violence in the Torah and the Bible. And he would be calling out the various so-called Christians that are advocating for wars in these countries too. If it was about religion, then it'd be an equal sort of thing. But even so, you shouldn't be calling for the deaths of people or the reduction of that group of people. You shouldn't be calling for things like that. That is dangerous. That is a sort of talking like, that's a genocidal sort of thing. It's hate speech. And we shouldn't be embracing that. As I said the other day, like I've been around for a while. I've been around since the 60s. I've grown up and I've known a lot of atheists, and they were quite peaceful people. They didn't feel the need to be they didn't sort of it wasn't some sort of crusade in quotes to sort of stamp out religion, because it just wasn't that. They were atheists, and it wasn't some sort of crusade. But this new some people, and I'm saying just some, seem to be using this as a method to stamp out religion, as if religion is the problem, when in fact a lot of new atheists subscribe to state religion, meaning they subscribe to imperialism and warmongering in these countries. That's not seen, but they can't recognize that that's actually a religion. Patriotism and nationalism and American exceptionalism, these are all kinds of religions too, because people join up, they kill people, they kill many, many people and murder and maim children in the name of state religion. And this is part of what Sam Harris promotes. This is part of what, some people in New Atheist circles promote. You can do anything. You can use a baseball bat. You can use to kill people. It doesn't have to be religion. You can use patriotism to vilify others and then to target them and kill them. You don't need any sort of, you don't need any sort of particular, you can use anything as a vessel to express hate. And unfortunately, people are using, and they're using New Atheism, some people are using it to express a hatred of particular groups, a group that happens to already be a vilified group that they're being killed by the hundreds of thousands, and in Iraq there's been 1 million already have been killed. So it's like a cowardly thing to target, and this is what Sam Harris does, to target a group, and then a group that's already vilified and that's already suffering. 1.5 billion, I think, people on the planet are Muslim. A group that's already suffering, he's targeting them and actually assisting and propping up the imperialist governments so that they can go in and destroy these countries for resources and hegemony. So what you're doing when you subscribe to that sort of person, that sort of leader, you are actually assisting in the destruction and killing of women and children and men, civilians. That's what you're doing. So if you are, and particularly if you are an abolitionist vegan and you claim to be against racism, and you are making excuses and saying, he was taken out of context. This is the thing that Sam Harris often says about himself. They took me out of context. Boy, they've been taking him out of context a lot, haven't they? Ever since, I don't know, for years and years now. He's been supposedly taken out of context for years. You know, people must be really stupid if they keep on taking him out of context. Maybe he needs to choose his words better. You know, if he's continually being taken out of context, maybe he needs to choose his words better. I mean, in one book he said people, you know, that have dangerous ideas should probably be killed. And then when people took him up on that, whatever that means, dangerous ideas, when people took him to task on that, he said, oh no, you're taking me out of context. He says this all the time. And this is what a lot of people who subscribe to Sam Harris's work or whatever say, oh no, you're just taking him out of context. You're willfully taking him out of context. Now, I don't know whether this seems to be a US phenomenon, and I don't know whether it's because the religious right, the Christian right, and I use that word Christian loosely, the Christian fundamentalist right have had a lot to do in American politics, and they've spread a lot of bigotry. And I don't know whether it's maybe it's because there's been such an infiltration of church and state in the United States that this is like some sort of backlash, and Sam Harris is tapped into an anger towards the religious right, the Christian right, which has been meddling in that country. But unfortunately, even if that was the case, promoting the reduction of a group covertly and their people, right, promoting that is hate speech, and it doesn't matter what group it is. Doesn't matter if it's the spaghetti monster worshippers, okay? Spaghetti monster worshippers. Look, if a group worshipped the spaghetti monster, okay, and they were being targeted the way Muslims are being targeted, and their countries, say if they had many countries where there were spaghetti monster worshippers, I would have as much problem with that as I do with say Sam Harris vilifying Muslims and calling for a reduction in numbers of those people. and covertly and whatever, or suggesting preemptive nuclear strikes in Muslim-majority countries, and being quite happy about all the warring going, bombing of those countries. If it was spaghetti monster majority countries, I would still have a problem. It's not about the religion. It's not about the religion. And when people start to say, oh, you're just a religious person and you're propping up these religions or whatever, you're defending religions, and then they go into, how it's just supernatural thinking. Whatever you think about religion, this has nothing to do with religion. This is about vilifying a group that happen to be people who have a particular religion, but it's not about the actual religion. People are being killed who look Arab. They're not, people are being pushed into subways like Indians, or people who look Arab are being killed because ignorant people think they're Muslims and they push them in front of moving trains and stuff like that. This is happening. So it's about the people. It's not about the religion. And what I'm trying to say is I regularly highlight the tremendous Islamophobia that's happening today, because it's hardly ever addressed, and because it's convenient for our Western governments to keep it all going so we can target that group and take their resources and have hegemony in the Middle East. And we need to wake up. We need to wake up and stop feeding this official narrative that is being fed to us, which is feeding into some people's already deep-seated racism, the otherization of a group simply because they look a little different. So, we need, if we say we're against racism, then we have to sort of like call out people that are using movements to keep this violence going. And I'm talking about Sam Harris, and I'm talking about that comedian Bill Maher, who is incredibly, he's been as Islamophobic as Sam Harris. These are the so-called left. Then there's nothing left about them. Left is when if you're really left, you are against imperialism, you are against war, you are against racism, you are against sexism, you are against heterosexism, you are against any discrimination which causes violence. And eventually I'm hoping that people who are against these particular discriminations will wake up and see that the violence that we promote towards, the violence that we engage in every single day when we eat, wear and use animals is also, to be vegan is to be on the left. We need to wake up to the fact that speciesism is also as wrong as these other discriminations. And being vegan is the expression of rejecting that violence, to not use animals for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons. So, so if we are already vegan and we reject speciesism, if we reject speciesism, then we should reject racism, sexism, heterosexism, and classism, ableism, etc. And see that flag back there behind me, if you can see it? That's a Palestinian flag. Palestine is at the present time, and I say this because this is something that's very unpopular to talk about. People are afraid they're going to be called anti-Semites, which is just a load of nonsense. You can be anti-Zionist, meaning you can be against apartheid Israel and the genocide that is happening against Palestinians. You can be against that and not be an anti-Semite. Okay? So people need to get their head around that issue too. And I was supposed to have an interview today with Peter Cohen, who is part of a group called Humanity for Palestine. And unfortunately, he had some audio issues. Something was wrong with his audio. And so I couldn't go ahead with that particular interview on Real Progressives today, which was really unfortunate because he had some great information that he could have shared about that, and I'm hoping to reschedule that with Peter. And I've got some really great people I'm going to be interviewing in the next coming Fridays, and I hope that you'll tune in to that, because it's all about anti-imperialism and anti-racism. And this is so important. You know, people say they're abolitionist vegan, but absolutely have no interest and show no interest in anything other than non-human animals. People say they're intersectionalists, and they talk a good game about it, but they never ever talk about anything specific. Even Black Lives Matter talks about Palestine, and that there needs to be an end to this brutal occupation, and that it's way, way worse than the height of apartheid in South Africa. It's way, way worse than that. So we need to understand this about Palestine. Right now, there's a genocide going on in Palestine. Right now, there's a genocide going on in Yemen. Who is responsible for the genocide in Yemen? Western governments. Why? Because the US is backing Saudi Arabia, which is going in and has been bombing the blazes out of Yemen and committing an ethnic cleansing. And now there's one child dying every 10 minutes of famine, and now cholera. Every 10 minutes there's a child. It's like it's a tremendous humanitarian crisis there. Do you see the US going in there doing anything? They're actually backing that genocide that's happening in Yemen. They're actually giving money and weapons to Saudi Arabia, and so is the UK. The US government has just signed a deal for $350 billion, I think, worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia then goes and uses those, bombs civilians in Yemen, and has created this unbelievable humanitarian crisis. Do you hear about it in the media? No. Why? Because it's convenient for Western governments. Because they want control of that region as well. You see the picture? This is imperialism. This is war. This is racism as well. Muslim majority countries, they're up for grabs. Imperialism, Western imperialism is alive and well in those countries and is determined to destroy them, create a managed chaos situation so we can have hegemony and take the resources. So we need to wake up. I'm really disheartened at the lack of interest in human issues. And I say the intersectionalists too, because I never see anything tangible on any of these people that call, any of these, the vegan intersectionalists, the people who call themselves intersectionalists, anything tangible on their page. It's all just verbiage. It's all just words. You know, sort of, I'm against racism, I'm against sexism. Well, if you're not actually putting anything tangible out there, you know, it's not enough just to say I'm against stuff. You actually, be like the Black Lives Matter movement and start advocating for the end of the brutal occupation in Palestine. That's what Black Lives Matter do. They're not afraid of that issue. It's an unpopular issue. It's an unpopular issue. And there's reasons for that, and I hope that you'll join my page, The Naked Empire, and find out about that issue, why it's unpopular. So, you know, instead of just sort of people going, I'm against racism, I'm against sexism, I'm against this, actually sort of advocate for something. It's not good enough. It's not good enough to just sort of say I'm against this, and then and it's all generalized terms. We have to actually do something, or at the very least, try and bring these issues to the public's attention. Like there's nothing about Yemen in the corporate media, and you won't hear about it from our governments. Do you see any Western governments condemning the genocide that's happening in Yemen? No. And why is that? Because US empire is involved, and they're all afraid of US empire. You see? You know, so unless we understand the history, we have to understand the history. History is important. I'm sorry that I seem a little bit annoyed about this, but I just, when that particular vegan came on my page and was excusing Sam Harris and his obvious promotion of hate speech, and making excuses and saying, oh, you've taken it out of context. People always say that. I've lost a few friends now through this, oh, you're just a religious person. You're just sticking, you're just making you're just against atheists. That's a nonsense. Like I said, if a large group of people who worship the spaghetti monster were being bombed like the Muslims are in their own countries, and it was for resources and hegemony, or they're just being bombed, right? Basically to destroy them and their countries, I would have a problem with it. I would have a problem with it. It's not about the religion. It's not about the religion. So anyway, I just really think it's about time. People should stop calling themselves, stop saying they're against racism and sexism, etc., if you're actually not advocating for anything and being specific and taking a stand. There's no point in calling yourself an intersectionalist if you're not taking a stand on anything. You're just airy-fairy, and sort of, or that you're scolding white people. And that's your shtick, is to just tell white people they're fucked every day. That's not education either. White people, yes, white people are really problematic. We're problematic. I have privilege. I am a beneficiary of that privilege. I get that and I understand it. But some intersectionalists in the vegan community, their whole idea of education is to tell white people every day that they're fucked. That's not education. And I've said this before. If Cornel West, if you know Dr. Cornel West, he's incredibly outspoken. He takes no prisoners. He's incredibly outspoken against racism and other forms of discrimination. But he doesn't go around telling white people they're fucked. He actually educates people. So that's sort of something that we need to think about. People that are really skillful in their education of these issues. Don't have to mollycoddle white people and be nice, pat them on the head and whatever. You don't have to. But I'm saying you have to actually have something that speaks to people and reaches them. If you're talking about white privilege, then speak about it. Speak about what it is, etc. But telling white people they're fucked, that's not going to work. It just doesn't work. You have to actually educate people. It'd be like vegans telling non-vegans they're fucked. That's not going to work either. You see what I'm saying? So I've said this before, but anyway. So Dr. Cornel West, and there's Ajama Baraka. Anybody who isn't aware of Ajama Baraka, or who isn't aware of the Black Agenda Report, just look on Facebook or look online for the Black Agenda Report. Glenn Ford and Margaret Kimberley and Ajama Baraka, they're all they write these great pieces, and that's education. So let's take a leaf out of that book if we're into, if you're educating about anti-racism. Please look at how Ajama Baraka and Dr. Cornel West educate about these issues. I'm begging you. Because what some folks are doing in relation to intersectional education is not working. It's not working. And I'm sorry if you take offense at that, but that's a fact. It's not working. You take a leaf out of the book of Ajama Baraka and Cornel West and Glenn Ford and see how they go about this issue of educating the public about white privilege, about white supremacy, about anti-imperialism, about anti-war. All these people, those particular individuals who are from the black community, they care about what we're doing to Muslims in Muslim majority countries. They care about it. That's real sort of anti-racism work, education. not just only caring about your own community, the black community, but caring about other communities that are being vilified and being killed and maimed and their countries destroyed. That's real anti-racism education. So anyway, this is a bit of a vent. It's a bit of a rant, and that's okay, because, I just sort of I just feel the hypocrisy in this. I'm feeling less and less connected to so-called animal advocacy movement or the vegan movement or whatever, less and less connected to it, to the point where I feel really no kind of connection at all, because of the complete lack of interest, the almost zero lack of interest in what our countries are doing in other countries, and the warmongering in those countries for resources and hegemony, which we are all beneficiaries of. If we don't care about that, I don't have much in common with you, if you don't care about that. So, this is what I'm saying. This is the point I'm making, is, if we claim that we are against racism, sexism, and all this sort of thing, and if we claim that we're feminists, and we're okay with, children being maimed and through uranium-depleted bombs and being deformed, etc., and their mothers having to sort of try and look after these children. If we're okay with that, what kind of feminists are we? Are we corporate feminists who only care if Hillary Clinton gets in as president? A woman who's destroyed a country, Libya, who doesn't give a toss about poor black people. You know what I'm saying? Doesn't give a toss. It's corporate feminism, and there's so many of them. That's not real feminism. We need to wake up and find out what feminism is. If we think that's feminism, sticking up for a neoliberalist oligarch who happens to be female, and saying, oh, she should have been president, please. We might have been in the middle of World War III right now if Hillary Clinton had been president. Donald Trump's no picnic. He's as problematic. But she was definitely going to create a no-fly zone over Syria, which meant an engagement with Russia, meaning World War III, because they're not going to do an on-the-ground battle. They said they're not going to do a fight on the ground. They're going to, it's going to be nuclear, because they would lose if they did a battle on the ground. So and the U.S. empire is trying to start a war with Russia, so that I don't know what the hell they want. They've gone nuts. I'm sorry, they've lost it. They want hegemony in the world, and I don't even think they care if there's a nuclear war. And that'll be the end of it. It won't be a war. It'll be a big fireball, and that'll be the end of it. Nuclear war doesn't make sense, because if there is a nuclear launch, it's over for all of us. So anyway, if we don't take interest in these sort of issues, we might wake up one day to a nuclear winter. That's one thing. We also will have somebody kicking down our door, just like they're kicking down the doors of Palestinians, or we might have drones dropping bombs on us one day. Because what oligarchs do in one country, in countries overseas, eventually it comes back. You're not going to be safe from that. And being white isn't going to protect you. The public are disposable, at this point. The politics of disposability. We're disposable at this point. Doesn't matter what color we are. So if you have no interest in other races because they're other races, and at best you're silent about that. You're silent about what's happening to them. Then one day somebody's going to be kicking in your door. That's what happened eventually, that saying, and what happened in Nazi Germany. First they came for that group, and then they came for another group, and eventually there was no one to speak out for me. That's what's going to happen. So anyway, I've gone a bit astray. It started off with the vegan getting upset with me, and I just couldn't I don't even feel like sort of discussing it anymore with people. If they can't see the hate speech that's being spewed from Sam Harris, then, and that how dangerous that is. And like I said, it's not about religion for me. It's about vilifying a group and saying, let's reduce their numbers covertly. These are the words that he was saying. And you can put it in, oh, he was just saying that as a hypothetical. Well, it's problematic. And saying in his book, the end of, I forget the name of it, that preemptive strikes in Muslim countries, nuclear strikes, that sort of suggestion. Imagine somebody saying, okay, I'm advocating for a preemptive nuclear strike to, sort of wipe out Jews. Or let's reduce the number of Jews. Would that be okay? Would anybody think that's okay? But why is it okay to say that about Muslims? So, enough of this, I'm an intersectionalist, or I'm against racism, sexism, heterosexism, and all this sort of stuff, and not actually advocating for anything, not sticking up for the Palestinians, not sticking up for the Black Lives Matter and the mass incarceration of black people. Let's think about this for a moment, about just about the issue of mass incarceration, disproportionately imprisoned black people in the United States. I read recently that in private prisons, the private prison industrial complex looks at the elementary school exam results, and so they can decide how many beds they need for the future in their private prisons. Think about that for a second. Is that the sort of society you want to live in, where it's a sort of vulture capitalism? No offense to vultures, but it's a sort of like sitting and waiting for these children to grow up and to end up in their private prisons, and trying to assess how many beds they need. So, these are the sort of things we should be talking about. We should be talking about, the wars in these countries, and that it's wrong and that it needs to end. And we need to have a vision of the future. We need to have a vision of what we want. If we don't have a vision of what kind of society we want, then how will we ever have that society? If we're just going to let these oligarchs, who now 5 people own more wealth than half the population of the planet, if we're just going to let the less than 1% run the show, we're going to end up in a huge fireball. And we're not going to have a planet, because we're almost, I'd say it's too late now. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's too late, really, in some ways, to save the environment. And there's no sign of them. It's in runaway global warming now. We had a huge trillion-ton piece of Antarctica break off the size of Delaware just recently. It's runaway global warming now. But I mean, we either die or we do something, don't we? We either die or we try and continue to make the planet people more loving and kind and caring about one another. We have to have some vision of a world, and if we're going to go out soon, if we're going to go out in the next 3 decades, which is a big possibility, imminent human extinction and taking the rest of all these species that have done nothing, they're going to suffer. They had the misfortune of being on a planet with an evolutionary experiment, which is us, we humans. And I say that without a hint of misanthropy. We are an evolutionary failed experiment, and they unfortunately had the misfortune of being on this planet with us. And we're taking them out with us too. But at least let us try and first, as a first step to a nonviolent life, be vegan. And second, try and do our best to turn the tide, push against this sort of rapacious, awful capitalism, the austerity that is destroying people's lives, not only in these poorer countries like Yemen, and destroying people in the Middle East and their countries, but also it's coming home to roost in Western countries. It's all over the place now. Neoliberalism is all over the place now. We don't want that kind of world. We want a world where we have equality, don't we? And justice, and we want a non-violent world. We want children to be loving, to see non-human animals as the sentient beings they are, and that they deserve not to be used as resources. We want children to be loving, and not to be just viewed as economic resources for the future, human resources. We don't want people to be viewed like that. If we have to have a vision of tomorrow if we want it to actualize. If we don't have a vision, then we'll just amble down into oblivion. And is this the way we want to go out? We don't want to go out that way, do we? Even if we only have 3 or 4 decades left, as a species, let's try and make these last decades something of some sort of, something to respect, something where we're not just like some sort of like like when empires fall and everything is just a disgusting mess. Let's try not to be like that, because it's looking more and more like that. Let's at least go out in some kind of style. I don't know, in some kind of where we can have some dignity. So let's try and actualize. We have to envision a sort of I first of all envision a vegan world. I feel if people started caring about the smallest insects and other animals who are the most vulnerable group on the planet and whom we are eating, wearing and using every single day, and it's tremendous violence, all for trivial reasons, because we don't need animal products to survive. So we're doing all this violence for trivial reasons and killing 1 trillion land and aquatic animals every year for trivial reasons. So the first thing for a non-violent life, we need to be vegan. And I urge anybody who watches this, if you're not vegan, but you care about, if you're anti-racist advocate and all of that, please consider going vegan. And I'll put a link to a recent chat I did with Eunice Wong, which I thought she said some great things in that conversation on Real Progressive. So I'll put that there. Please watch it. So, the first thing I envision for a world is to at least be vegan. And I think a lot of things will stem from that. Because if we care about the most vulnerable on the planet who are non-humans, who have no voice except for ours, those poor animals, except for ours, if we care about those animals and the tiniest insect or whatever, then we will care hopefully about other, we'll care about humans. Although I'm not feeling very confident about that, because I've just sort of criticized a lot of the animal advocacy movement for not showing any interest in humans while claiming that they are. But I'm hoping that, that if most of the world becomes vegan, then there will be a care for humans and not otherizing. So anyway, that's the start, and I could go on, but we have to have a vision for what we want. So anyway, this is sort of a bit of a rant and a rave and stuff, but and thanks, Paula, for joining in. And anybody else who might see this after the fact, after being live, I invite you to go to my site, howtogovegan.org, and check out the ethical reasons to be vegan, and there's great nutrition information on there as well. So thanks very much for watching, and until next time, you're watching Faint Signals from Vegan. My name's Trish Roberts. Good night.